Our disability is our greatest strength. It gives us a supervision to see the issues facing humanity from a more inclusive perspective and the grit to fight back against all odds. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the More Than Walking Video podcast discussion. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the podcast where people of all abilities gather to discuss pressing issues that affect the disability community and the implications for the world at large. We are your host. I am Corey Pheez, C4 complete quadriplegic since 2005.
And I am Jonathan Sigworth, C7 complete quadriplegic since 2006, both of us hailing from the great state of Connecticut.
And we're recording this on Thursday, the 24th of April, 2025. And in a little bit, we'll be doing our wrap-up episode of the month about education. Class dismissed.
And just as a friendly reminder, Super Adaptables is made possible in part by a grant from the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation's National Paralysis Resource Center. The information provided and opinions expressed in these podcasts, as always, do not necessarily reflect the views of the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. For more information about the Foundation's National Paralysis Resource Center, visit www.christopherreeve.org. Also, I always note that the views expressed on this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of More Than Walking either, but belong to us as individual speakers.
Indeed. And I must say, I've been watching a lot of Superman material over the past few days. But at any rate, so, we've been discussing education over the past weeks and its systems from both the local and national levels. And we began this series with a brief history of the Department of Education, when and how it was started, and its primary role in the lives of students across the country. This conversation was brought up because recently the federal government, through executive order, has begun to dismantle the Department of Education to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse.
According to whitehouse.gov, the current administration spoke about waste coming in the form of, quote unquote, progressive social experiments and obsolete programs. Many of the reasons listed are aimed at initiatives that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, eliminating the forced implementation of, quote unquote, race-based discrimination and gender identity ideology in states and school systems. As people and persons with disabilities, our question is, what does this all mean for our community?
Yeah, and we'll get into, a couple of programs that I looked into that, were cut. But, when I think about some of the language that's being used personally, as someone with a disability, and I hear words like progressive social experiments, coupled with the comments made about DEIA, makes me question, am I an experiment? Is that how my community is personally viewed? And the need and desire to be included in any conversation is a direct result of years of stigmatization and prejudice and exclusion that people like you and I face daily. So prime example, right? So let's go back to the comments that were made about the helicopter crash in DC earlier this year. There was an immediate attack on the FFA and the DIA, claiming that they had lowered their standards to have more diverse hiring. This was done without any evidence or how much experience anybody had, whether it was the pilots, whether it was the FAA. And obviously, you're not going to look at a pilot and say, it's going to be lowering their standards. Or maybe you did a little bit. At the end of the day,
they even, what was it? PBS interviewed a pilot, an amputee, who had one arm, who's a trained pilot. He flies commercial airlines with one arm. I think he might have had a prosthetic as well. Like, he passed the same exams, the same stringent, levels of professionalism and skill that any other pilot would. And yeah, it was ridiculous that people with disabilities were scapegoated in the immediate aftermath of that.
Yeah, exactly. And that, it brings up something too that I remember watching this guy who was like special forces. I don't remember if he was like a Ranger or a SEAL or a Delta Force or what have you, but he had lost his leg, right? And after, rehabbing and physical therapy, returned back to the battlefield and helped to train people and whatnot. So, people with disabilities want to be a part of the fight at the end of the day, whether that's about education, employment opportunities, just being a part of society. We want it. And we're not afraid of any of the smoke. But, the notion that someone who may have benefited from diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility initiatives can be blamed for the horrific death of someone without accurate information is cringeworthy. So to tie that all back to the topic at hand, you're not lowering the bar to let people in without merit. You're giving people a fair shake at equal opportunity and opening the door for individuals who look different from you but possess the same skill set, and that begins with access to education.
Absolutely. And kind of to go back a little bit about race-based discrimination and gender identity ideology, that this is what is being attacked and eliminated. Up until recently, there has been an active affirmative action for white men. Like that has been the default setting of our society, right? Until women's rights, until civil rights, you couldn't get a job, and before that, you couldn't own land, unless you were a white male. Like you couldn't get a mortgage. You couldn't. There are so many parts of society that were blocked off if you didn't look like me, just by default. And so the idea that we are somehow we are experimenting and forcing race-based discrimination by making it an equal playing field for people of all abilities and for people of all backgrounds and all genders and all gender identities. And that is somehow reducing competition instead of increasing competition and allowing everyone who has the capacity to do a job to apply for it and get it is kind of, it doesn't make sense. It's the opposite. So you're absolutely right, Corey. Access to opportunity begins in the classroom, where the setting is welcoming so that students can focus their attention on the agenda set forth by the teacher and the local school system. Which brings me back to one of the points that we highlighted during our intro into this series, and that's what does the Department of Education do, and why is it important? First, we dispelled a few myths that are associated with the department. For example, the Department of Education does not create curriculum for students, but rather sets forth policies, provides grants and loans to schools, to districts, and also to individuals through their student loan program. The Department of Education also combats discrimination on behalf of children in school. In a nutshell, power isn't necessarily being returned to your local education system. That power has always been in your hands as parents, as educators. Legislation such as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, is enforced by the Department of Education alongside state educational agencies, which play a crucial role in protecting the rights of children through due processes.
Exactly. And, going back to, the things that children need to be protected from is discrimination, right? So, I read an article, it was in Newsweek, and it was talking about that the cuts that Doge had made were almost to the tune of $1 billion. And it made me think like, okay, what are some of these programs that are actually being targeted that they're saying the Department of Education is running inefficiently? And I'm quoting from the article, some of the biggest were for long-term studies that track students learning from kindergarten through high school, a study evaluating strategies for teaching elementary school reading, and research on the effectiveness of support for young people with disabilities. That was reported by the AP. And, going back to like just being discriminatory, like we need to understand how our young folks are doing, especially those with disability, those who are on the fringes of society. Without accurate data, you don't know how to create programs and systems that's going to work for them when they are in a real world application. So I had watched another news segment. There's a young lady, she's about 26, and she worked for this company, and she does a lot of like just admin work. She also does like, the upkeep in the office and cleaning and clearing tables and stuff. But, you can see that she had maybe like a learning or intellectual disability. She only works one day out of the entire week, but she feels so happy that she can put back and give back in a way that's comfortable for her, doesn't overwhelm her. And then they're starting to give her more tasks because they're seeing how quickly she's actually learning. She wouldn't have gotten those opportunities had she not had sufficient resources in her school setting, her parents being advocates for that type of inclusion. But, you know, the discrimination piece of the Department of Ed is important because we're talking about due process and rights. And that's going to be our topic for next month. The main crux of IDEA or IDEA begins with the federal government. At the federal level, OSSEP, the Office of Special Education Programs, offers guidance and monitors state compliance. At the state level, agencies such as the Connecticut State Department of Education ensures that school districts are following IDEA's guidelines, and they look into district compliance as well as they review parental complaints. And they even conduct site visits. And ultimately, this gives parents the power to pursue legal action if necessary when their child's rights are violated.
You know, Corey, it's clear that with all the criticism of late about the Department of Education, to me, it doesn't seem all that bad. However, we do understand that the federal government isn't perfect, reform is needed, but how we go about it is a whole other story. I remember hearing from one of our podcast attendees about this, about his attempt to contact the department about an issue, and he was unable to reach a live person on the phone. And it makes me begin to question the efficiency of technology versus real human interaction. And the irony is, laying off half the department and moving resources to different areas of the government, that's not necessarily going to make it easier to contact a human being on the phone. Or if you do contact someone, for them to have the years and years and years of specialized experience dealing with the thing you need, if that program has all of a sudden been moved from the Department of Education to some other department that's taking over those responsibilities.
Yeah, it's going to be, to me, confusing, right? Like, I mean, that's one of the things that we've talked about extensively with timeliness of wheelchair repair, speaking to a live person. Like, it's like follow this prompt, and it's something urgent that you really need. Maybe it's a loan deadline or something. Maybe you didn't receive the money that is due to you, and you need to have these books in by a particular time. However, your situation plays out, you really want to have that interaction. And I agree with you, laying off more people without even showing how you're going to make it efficient, right? You just take programs out and just say, okay, well, that's going to be the answer. We just want to save money. Well, okay, if you're going to save money, are you going to reinvest in a different type of infrastructure, right? So, but yeah, the swift actions that have been taken have everyone on the back of the heels. However, we want to remind our viewers that it does take an act of Congress to close the department completely. And I'm not sure if we're there yet, but that's why, we sat down with a few experts to hear how the changes being made are impacting the community, proverbially speaking, directly from the horse's mouth.
Exactly. We sat down with several experts, including one former and current teacher, a principal of an alternative school, the director of Independence Northwest, which is a center for independent living and provides educational and employment opportunities for people with disabilities, and the director of Children and Family Advocacy and Parent Training and Information Center of the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, also known as DREDF, DREDF, which is a nonprofit that focuses on advancing the civil and human rights of people with disabilities through legal advocacy, training, education, and public policy and legislative development. They do a lot.
Yeah, they do. But, during that episode, we dove deeper into the minds of the educators and leaders who deal directly with the parents and students. And some key takeaways for me that I got from the conversation was, towns with more financial resources, they worry less about federal funding. And why is this happening? Because they have a larger base of local funding, like property taxes, which makes them less reliant on federal grants that are often targeted at schools serving low-income students or those in rural areas. And just using him as an example, the president, I read, his dad paid his kids like $20,000 a year, right? And I think it's like, in today's money, it's like counting inflation, be a millionaire by 8, right? And he went to a private school. And when he didn't kind of particularly do well in that school, went to a military school, and then eventually graduates, goes off to college. He goes to a very nice, business school, which produces the most billionaires in America. And now he's ascended to the top of the pile. I bring that up because it's not about where you are on the side of the aisle. It's to see that the benefits of when you have resources and things invested in you. So public education has produced many great individuals. We're not saying that, but what we are saying, based off of the discussion we had on our podcast, is that if you're in a school district that isn't rural, isn't filled with low income students, you're less reliant. That means the Chromebook that you need, there's enough for every student, not just a few. Access to broadband. These kids are moving at light speed, and they need all that they can possibly get. I just remember during COVID, I was like, man, thank God, like I have good internet. I have, I can afford this, tablet, and we have a laptop. When I know there's so many children out there who don't have it, so that's one key
Absolutely.
takeaway.
And
Yeah,
and government needs to move faster to make broadband internet more available to people because I know that I remember reading, back in when Biden was president, they had passed some laws to make that more available in rural areas, and
yeah,
the mechanisms of government and the processes were so slow that still hadn't been rolled out yet. And as you know, as the current president is showing, you can do some executive actions and things, but guess what? He didn't make that go any faster. That's
right.
not his priority. That's not the current priority of the administration. It seems, and that's disappointing because you're absolutely right. The Department of Education provides funding. The biggest part of their budget is not what they pay their staff. It's the money that they give to schools to provide access to those things, those Chromebooks, the internet access, the transportation for students. It's all of those things at the very local level that they help states pay for. Um, so anyway, yeah. So getting rid of that department is a huge blow to providing equal access to all those important educational resources.
Yeah, and then it's like, you wonder, like, all right, if you're going to get rid of it or make modifications, I think the transition needs to be more gradual, right? Like when they talk about, let's say, eliminating taxes or whatever, that's going to go over the course of the next 10 years. Like people are used to a particular way. And once you get used to that way and you figure it out, it's hard to change something so rapidly if it's just part of like a political agenda on whatever side of the aisle. But
Yeah.
the other thing,
Well, and
sorry, yeah,
well, and also like rapid change. That's not just like it's not like changing a subscription or changing something that just impacts you. Like,
mm,
if the system is not able to catch up, people will fall through the cracks. And
yeah,
these are people's lives. These are people's ability to pursue careers down the line, getting set up to have their own families and be successful citizens. So we cannot afford disruptions when it means a child not being able to get access to the special education supports that they need to thrive and to then go to school and then to become, the researcher who finds a cure for that rare disease that we're all going to be facing in 2 decades, So
yeah.
we cannot afford to have people fall through the cracks. These are not games. These are people's lives that are at stake.
In fact, that's a fact. And so another takeaway I got from it were was that people and persons with disabilities by law are entitled to FAPE or free appropriate public education because within IDEA or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, this right, it ensures that all students with disabilities have access to FAPE and that it meets their unique needs. And some examples are IEPs and 504 plans. And one of our guests helped to explain the difference between the two. An IEP is a more comprehensive plan developed for students who require specialized instruction and services to access the general education curriculum. So we're talking about like transportation needs, speech therapy needs, social work, things of that nature. And a 504 plan provides accommodations and support for students who don't need specialized instruction, but still require modifications for their learning environment. And, that's important because, again, the demand here in America, I can't speak for anywhere else, country. Like we have no chill. We're like not relaxed. Um, and we just have difficulty um, being able to kind of process things as we go. And so if you're a student who's having difficulty with that, you need to have plans like that in place so that you're better suited to meet whatever expectation of that the curriculum demands.
Absolutely. And um, one of the things we also discussed was how 504 is under attack by nearly a dozen states because they didn't like the fact that gender dysphoria was added as a disability to one of the covered um, disabilities for accommodations. And often what that means for someone with gender dysphoria is, they deal with a lot of anxiety, a lot of, bullying in school or other issues. And you can imagine, going, body image issues, related to being in middle school, high school. There's a lot of anxiety in the school environment, and need to have extra time or safe spaces to talk to counselors or a trusted teacher. And certain states have decided that because they disagree and don't believe in the existence of gender dysphoria, they want to get rid of 504 altogether, which would completely eliminate this protection for people of all disabilities, which is devastating. And, living with a spinal cord injury, Corey and you and I both know, like, if you don't have a spinal cord injury, it's hard to understand what living with a spinal cord injury is like, right? And all the implications of that, the impact on our bowel, our bladder, our social lives, how we have families, how we go about our work. It's really difficult to put yourself in our shoes if you haven't experienced it. But, hopefully those of us with disabilities do understand that it doesn't matter if you can't understand our experience or if we can't understand someone else's experience. We know what it means to be vulnerable. We know what it means to be misunderstood. And we know what it means to have accommodations that make our lives possible. Like, I don't need to understand your need for an accommodation to believe that you have a right to an accommodation to allow you to live your life, you know? And we just need people to trust that, even if you don't understand any given disability. We hope you don't have to live with a disability if you don't have it. But if you do, welcome to the community. It's a great thing. It's full of unique opportunities. And this is one of those opportunities that we have as a society, is to grow and expand our understanding and to accommodate each other so that we can all take advantage of the system and contribute to that community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you know, that's spot on, like when you're kind of like in the reverse role. Because I know when I get to my kids' school, I'm always like, man, this is so tight to get through this doorway right here. I wonder if they would ever consider expanding it. And then there's another issue that I always have at my son's elementary school. When you go into the gym, there's a bar like right in the middle of the door. And it's like, I have to wait to get to the janitor to open up, like to actually unlock this bar, right? And then when you unlock it, there's a very sharp, like, area where where the bar clips into. So if you have a tire that, let's say you had to inflate it, right? Or even if you didn't have a tire that was inflated, you go over it, you may tear the rubber off of it, which could damage your wheelchair, right? So it's like all these little things that nobody really notices until you're in the chair, and especially I'm at a different height. So I'm driving over it, I bump, I'm looking down, I'm just like, man, I know these kind of like run flat tires. At the same token, I'd be, SOL if
Well,
that thing like ripped it open.
well, and Corey, like, we're never going to expect someone who's not a wheelchair user to understand exactly or anticipate
Sure.
all those little things. The only way that's possible is if someone who's in charge of accommodations knows or has been trained or is someone in that same situation, which is why, just to bring us full circle, why diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility are so important. Because without those perspectives at the highest levels, how are we supposed to accommodate each other if we all have these unique backgrounds and needs and experiences? We need to have that door open to everyone, in order to make education and then employment and then society ultimately, open to everyone. And
Yeah,
just and we didn't touch us on this, but every time I get an opportunity, I also want to say, the Department of Education also runs things employment related, like vocational rehab, which helps people with disabilities adapt their vehicles, adapt their workplace, go back to school post disability. Um, so there's so many different things involved with the Department of Education, and also with these other educational supports, that maybe come outside the Department of Ed in general. That it just applies to so much more than the school environment.
that's true. I think too the onus is on parents to really be a part of what it is that their child is doing in and out of the classroom. If you don't know what's going on, you can't help to make the necessary complaints to cause reform in the school or hire if need be, um, before it's too late. Um, don't have the you know mental capacity to deal with what's going on. But in closing, as the time winds down, education is without a doubt the first step to ensuring access to opportunities. However, these opportunities mean nothing if access is disrupted. This is about the importance of the Department of Education and the role it plays in society from elementary school up through college. The impact of this social safety net has reached millions of kids since its inception during Jimmy Carter's administration. I'm not sure if we can even quantify all of the success stories that have come out of this department. On a personal note, my children both have 504 plans, and the ability to have work slightly modified, um, or they just need a little bit more time to test is a good thing. Today, I had the opportunity to go into my son's middle school and watch him receive another high honors award. This is a prime example of what parental responsibility, coupled with highlighting a child's brilliance, can look like if we give them the chance and the resources to the best so that they can be the best version of themselves.
Absolutely, Corey. And even if the Department of Education is dissolved and its responsibilities are shuffled around, everyone just needs to remain very vigilant, and aware that those functions remain, and are implemented in the right way, to the same extent, because ultimately, our the rights of students with disabilities, employees with disabilities, parents with disabilities, citizens with disabilities, um, permanent residents, and visitors with disabilities, anyone in this country, uh, no matter your status with a disability, these rights are human rights. They cannot be taken away. Even if they strip them out of the Constitution, I don't give a damn. They are human rights, they are ours, and we have to keep demanding that they be recognized. And that's what we're gonna do. Unapologetically.
Unapologetically. That's right, man. It's a great discussion as always, man. I can't wait to, you know, tap in next month.
Yes, next month. Have we said what the topic is gonna be? Oh, the ultimate social safety net.
Mhm. Due
What is it?
process.
Due process, that's right.
Yeah.
Due process. So stay tuned in and sign up for the More Than Walking newsletter at morethanwalking.com, and learn a little more about due process and how you can participate. Also, like, comment, and subscribe to our More Than Walking YouTube channel to watch each podcast, and click that notification bell so that you are alerted when new episodes drop. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for More Than Walking or Super Adaptables.
So until then, remain encouraged, stay hopeful, and above all else,
Keep adapting.